Let's try that again. I am so pleased to welcome Dr. Robert Peacock here this morning. And some of you may be wondering, how the heck is it that we could have, at Bridge, Michigan, could attract a professor from Miami to come in here and speak about Ukraine, of all things? The story is, it is a bit of a reunion this morning. Dr. Peacock and I grew up 5 doors down from each other in Mason, Michigan in the 1970s. At one point in a major transaction, I traded all of my Army soldiers to Bob for all of his baseball cards. We hung out together all through high school and into college, and unfortunately, we get together for our dad's funerals these days, wherever we are in the country. So that is why we're here today. And my group of friends and I have followed Dr. Peacock around the world for years and been fascinated by his career and his life. And I am so glad that all of you are going to get to know him a little bit this morning. So from Mason, Michigan to Ukraine to Florida to here on the Zoom this morning, we're going to talk about a wide range of things with Ukraine. As always, we welcome your comments in chat, and Dr. Peacock has also said he wants your questions probably more than mine. So, welcome, Dr. Peacock.
Well, thank you, John. And I still remember my sister pushing me down the street to the kid sitting on the curb at the corner, the new kid. And to this day, I remember my older sister Lori and John sitting down there. He had just moved into the street as it was going up, but we grew up in a nice little neighborhood next to the high school, and a lot of fond memories. And I'm also very proud of John keeping the craft of local investigative journalism alive in this digital age, and it's a real pleasure for me to be here and to meet with all of you and speak about Ukraine. John, did you want me to kind of go into introducing my background at this time?
Yeah. I'd love to hear. It's such a fascinating story how you came to live and work in Ukraine. Just take people through that a little bit so they know who they're talking to. And you're going to offer some pretty bold opinions here in a few minutes. I want everybody to know that you know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So I graduated from the University of Michigan with political science, Russian studies background, right as the wall came down, and there were absolutely no jobs in that area. So some wise professor said, get an MBA. And I said, why would I do that? He said, you want to work in government, get an MBA. And I listened. I went to Ohio University, the only place offering us scholarships and for an MBA. And sure enough, I got three job interviews in government after getting my MBA. But I was kind of lucky. I did an internship in Hungary at this leather factory by the border with Serbia that I wasn't thrilled about. I was the only one that didn't have lunch service with my internship in the post-Soviet space. It was a very difficult assignment. But the one lucky thing is that later when I was looking for work, they were standing up sanctions on Serbia, and they said, you've been to the border? I said, yeah, I've been to every export import place on that border. And they were just so thrilled. I got into the National Security Council's Serbian sanctions team, and that kind of got me into the government structures for the next decade. And my boss at the end, and it was it was during the Clinton administration, so I transitioned from financial stuff to gray arms and got to be part of Madeleine Albright's task force to try to end arms shipments into conflict zones in Africa, which really shaped my life a lot. And then my boss, when it looked like things were coming to an end, my boss got ambassadorships in Ukraine, and he managed under the new administration to get me what they call an analyst in an embassy position, where I was able to work for 3 years. I was essentially in the political section responsible for the relationship with Russia and the UN Sanctions Committee, or UN in general, because Ukraine was on the Security Council at the time. So that's the start. I met my wife. She was in the Ministry of Education of Ukraine. caused a little problems with my security clearances, and I decided to go on a new route and ended up working as a contractor for another decade, running Department of Justice programs in the former Soviet area, but primarily in Ukraine. And then trying to transition because I had kids growing up watching movies about America and the proms and all these wonderful things. They thought America must be like Disneyland every day. And why aren't I going to school in that wonderful paradise? So I promised them they would definitely go to high school in America, and time was running out. So I got my PhD at MSU over that period, and I've started working here. And of course, my kids hate Florida and they wish they were back in Ukraine. But that's how life works out. I tell them, you wanted American high school, you got it. So no complaining. But that's where I am. And to this day, I've got a very close relationship with Ukraine police. We had some very large reform programs. We stood up an entire new patrol police of 18,000 officers, where my team really developed both the selection, the training, and mentoring these guys, and women, 25% women, which was a dramatic change as well. And so I'm very close to the policing structures there that are reformed. They're kind of both in Ukraine. And those folks are on the edge of, they're part of the territorial defense units today. And so that's something I spent a lot of time on. But in terms of my research, I do a lot of cybersecurity, and I'm currently the director of higher education cybersecurity programs in Ukraine for USAID. So I currently oversee, we train in the summer hundreds of Ukrainian professors to develop cybersecurity there. Obviously, it's suspended at the current moment, but we plan to transition that as things change in Ukraine. And I actually will be part of a meeting with the ambassador. Currently, the USAID is overseen by Ambassador Power, and she will be down here, and I'm hoping to convince them that we can start again doing some things supporting cybersecurity in Ukraine. But that kind of takes you to where I am today, and I spend hours and hours following everything that's going on in Ukraine. Obviously, because if I didn't, I'd have to listen to my wife spend every hour worrying about Ukraine. So at least we keep busy. We try to keep a lot of conversations with people there, helping people out as we can. And just I've been writing op-eds, just got one yesterday in the Herald about Ukraine and the cyber war. So that's kind of where takes me to the present moment, John.
Thank you, Robert. And I told everybody he knows his stuff. Amber is going to be posting links to some of Dr. Peacock's recent commentaries in the chat window here. And his Facebook feed is also fascinating. I shared it with the Bridge team the minute the war broke out. And it's one of the key ways that I'm getting my news about Ukraine is through my friend Robert's analysis every day. It's fascinating, and it's very different than what we're hearing on the news. Robert, at Bridge, we have this saying, family first. We always take care of family first. I'd like to extend that to this conversation. Tell us about your wife and her family, and how everyone is doing. And I believe quite a bit of the family is in the middle of Ukraine right now as we speak.
Yeah, I mean, my wife has a small family. She has her mother and an aunt, and they are in villages that are in the center of Ukraine. So it's actually a rural area. It's not a strategic area. That said, we were following closely. The Russian original plan was to send armored units up from the south, from Crimea, to attack Kiev from the south, and that would have brought them within 15 kilometers of the village that my mother-in-law is in. But they had a very strategic battle on the road leading up to where my mother-in-law is, and a town with about 400 volunteers and some soldiers that had arrived there drove off the 50 tanks and the 500 paratroopers from Russia, in large part because they used the cement. In fact, there's an excellent Wall Street Journal article a few days ago that was giving a little description of this battle, but they used a cement and gravel truck that and company with their trucks to kind of seal off many of the roads to the bridge that was critical for the Russians. They blew the bridge only after the tanks got there, and then they had artillery hidden and then opened up, and most of the Russians fled after the initial artillery barrage, and so since that time, really, it's at this point it's not really expected that their area would be overrun anytime soon by Russians, and I personally am confident that the Russians no longer have the manpower to cross the country in that manner. So we're optimistic. My mother-in-law, it's mostly every day my wife gets talked down by my mother-in-law or to calm her down, and trying to keep her sanity versus the other way around. So it's been, yeah.
How is daily life for your mother-in-law? Electricity, food supplies, things like that.
Everything's fine. When we were trying, she has visa, and we were trying to get her to leave in December. It was clear that she wasn't going to. She's got responsibilities there, even though she's retired. She wasn't going to leave her friends. So we at least insisted that she stock up. So she personally stocked up. She's probably given half of it away, but I had her buy things in December because I didn't think there'd be an invasion, like really most people, even most analysts and professionals, even with the intelligence that was out there that was very public. But that said, I felt like there was going to be chaos, and the prices would go through the roof, and she should do this, anyways. So, but yeah, we have connection every day, good conversation, heat's on. She gets her power from the nuclear plant that has been given a lot of publicity as not being taken yet by the Russians. In fact, that would have been the next place this armored unit would have reached if they got past the battle that they lost. So she seems to be, she's definitely fine. And I think only a limited number of refugees, if you want to say, have come from her area. Certainly those with kids have gone. And I think if we had young kids there, that would be my advice, to go to farther Western Ukraine or into Poland. Most of the people I know are professionals, and others are in Western Ukraine. They haven't crossed into Poland, but some obviously have gone all the way to Poland or Hungary.
It's amazing. These are not stories we hear on the news about people who are staying and living their lives. You have spent so much time working with police and security forces. I think one of the surprises of this war is the resolve and ferocity of the Ukrainian people and its military. Can you speak to us about that and how and why that is?
Yeah, I think that there was a lot of distrust, particularly before 2014. So you have to remember that they started this mini war with Russia back in 2014. Not so much Crimea. I mean, Crimea, the largest base in Crimea was Russian to begin with. So they were never going to be able to defend Crimea. But when it comes to the Donbass area, this part of Eastern Ukraine that was with special Russian forces was set up as an insurgency, that battle has been kind of going on for quite a while. So I think at that stage, both the police and the military was seen as much. There was a lot more trust and positive attitudes toward them, but not when it comes to corruption and a lot of domestic things. And so we've been working with units that have won them over in that regard. And to this day, like, for example, the territorial defense units, and I think, Rolling Stone had an article, I guess it was about last week, but they were touting a couple of the pop stars in Ukraine having joined these units, and it turns out they joined the patrol police, territorial police units, because there is more trust. There's especially among the younger population with these. What the real reform, if I put it in a nutshell, it comes down to a word that we kind of take for granted in the United States, which is selecting officers simply based on merit, right? You read it 100 times a day, merit-based this, merit, right? But it's just bureaucratic mumbo jumbo for us. But in a place like Ukraine, and frankly, all the former Soviet states, it's revolutionary. In 2014, when we selected the patrol police, it was truly the first time merit-based selection took place in the government of Ukraine. Now it's gone on and expanded a great deal, and there are other ministries now that can make that claim. But that, I think, really laid the foundation for a lot of trust, especially at the local level. In places like Mariupol, I think Mariupol, which you've heard about, obviously the inhumane decisions to bomb, for example, that theater yesterday that's gotten a lot of press, and thank God it seems the basement held. But that city of Mariupol, it would almost be a textbook example of a pro-Russian, traditionally pro-Russian. It was a closed military city, and it had a lot of ethnic Russian soldiers who retired and had their families there. And it was not a very pro-Ukrainian city up to 2014. It wasn't voting to join Russia, but it was voting for maintaining the status quo in the relationship with Russia. And it's amazing to me how over the conflict in particular, seeing the occupied areas of Donbass turn into Mordor in terms of like life for the people there. I mean, there's nothing, Russia offered nothing of any real appeal to people to want to live under Russian control. And a place like to the south of that, Mariupol, the strategic city of that Donbass region, they've seen this and really turned towards the Ukrainian institutions. And the fact that they're holding out at this time, it just shows the degree to which sentiments have dramatically changed in a town like Mariupol, which is almost all, it's probably 65% ethnic Russian. People always talk about speaking, that's really incidental. That's just to decide, depending on how old you are, where you went to school, things like that. But the ethnic Russian, literally being born of a Russian family, is extremely high there. But they've been as committed, or arguably more committed, than any part of Ukraine in this battle.
Why do you think that is?
Like I said, a big part of it is that, the reason why they vote for the status quo, traditionally, the reason why we consider them pro-Russian is they felt like there's a lot of Soviet nostalgia there historically, especially for the older population. And so they were very open. They've been years open to this idea of a stronger relationship with Russia. But then they were shocked at what happened in 2014. When I talk to people who come out of the occupied Lugansk and Donetsk, these are two oblasts, they call them, right? These territories, there's 24 territories in Ukraine. 2 of them are these disputed territories, half controlled by Russian aligned forces. And when I talk to people coming out of the Russian occupied area, I mean, they say, picture this, the 4 biggest idiot bullies in your school, they now have guns and control our town. Like, that's what the idea of, the Russians basically took who's the most venomous and going to do our will. And they had no interest in quality of life. They had no interest in why would you want to live there after that. And people in the neighboring areas, Kharkiv is the second largest city of Ukraine. And as what I say for Mariupol goes to a lesser degree to Kharkiv. And same thing there. People say, I have why, first of all, the businessmen had their businesses stolen. So there goes the, business people aren't supporting this idea. Russians come in and they steal, they give to their cousins my business, and those, even the elderly who are more nostalgic, they do say, oh, the pensions are higher, but of course the ruble's being killed now and has been killed since 2014, has taken a beating. So even that factor has changed.
So is it fair to say that the disputed territories and the Russian incursions there over the past decade have actually heightened Ukrainian nationalism and loyalty?
Absolutely. If it had just been Crimea, and there were, business people come out of Crimea, the Ukrainians, and most of them ethnic Russian, a lot of them got their businesses stolen, their hotels stolen. So a lot of those refugees kind of come into Ukraine, and there's some of that for sure. But Russia's really put a lot into Crimea. First of all, it's 80% military economy. So of course, it fits well with the Putin economic model. But in Crimea, there would, people wouldn't have this sense of looming disaster. The invasion, as you said, the disputed territories, that's changed everything. There's no attraction. Right now, even, as we look in these, you look at other cities, not Mariupol, but Mariupol has these little twins, Berdyansk. These were also closed military cities, heavily ethnic Russian. And Melitopol is kind of half and half. But those cities along that coast, these people are yelling, screaming at the, get out, leave us alone. You don't, they're protesting every day. And it's the same. It's shocking to me because I used to go there and, these were not warmly embracing American cities necessarily. They had a lot of that post-Soviet paranoia even into the 2000s. But they just realize what is Russia offering us, and they've been using Chechen National Guard to be their patrol in some of these cities, and Chechens, sorry, this is, for people in Ukraine, that's it just screams human rights violators, and absolutely does nothing to add to your appeal to actually supporting a Russian occupation. So it's absolutely gone now. Putin has successfully created a hole and a Ukraine that actually has homogenized in many ways in their views, which I personally would never thought possible. I still remember writing cables in the 2000s about the Communist Party was winning a huge percentage of the election. And we had to convince Washington, yeah, but they're not interested in rejoining the Soviet Union, and here's why. But it was a very nuanced and difficult conversation. Today, there's just no more question along those lines at all.
So Putin's armor of invincibility and the worldview of him being a tactician and a ruthless modern day Stalin, that seems to be shattered today by the resistance in Ukraine. What is your assessment of Russia's military capability and its performance here?
It's surprising for, I think, everyone, really. We've just assumed, for example, not only is it huge quantity differences, right, in terms of soldiers, in terms of planes and tanks, but the quality, their bombers have French built, systems in the cockpit when it comes to, the digital display, the GPS, the targeting. Russia's put so many billions and billions of dollars into developing, I personally have been really promoting and passing on word about this new weapon the United States is sending, these floating munition that are essentially anti-tank weapons that are a drone and seeks out its target many kilometers away. But Russia that millions developing the same thing, and they're being found around Ukraine, busted, and they fall into the ground. They don't explode. So I think, most likely, and this is their debut. They just came out this year in Russia, though our own switchblades, as we call them, only came out a couple of years ago as well. But clearly somebody bought a yacht and built these with the money they got from the government. And I think there's corruption. There's a big joke around Ukraine that, a picture of the Minister of Defense with the Chief of Staff of Russia. And the one looks at him, said, "I thought I was stealing half the fuel for the soldiers." And the other says, "Well, I was stealing half." And it's crazy. Ukrainian, and what it's done for morale with Ukraine. So, there's Ukrainians constantly TikTok videos of these MRE meals, which are dated 2014, they're used through this date of 2014, 2015 on these MREs that the Russians have been issued. And guess what? 3-4 years ago, Putin's best friend got the contract to do food supply for the entire military. And clearly, Putin's own best friend and the director of the Russia bank is not, has been using that money for other things. And it's I think something that nobody could really have known. Russia's been in very limited conflicts. The Syria is mostly, bombing a people with very little ability to defend themselves from planes. And, I think we really had no idea until the conflict started. And Ukrainians, they have a lot of confidence in their own bravery, but I don't think they had a strong sense.
What's changed in the past 3 weeks from the opening anxiety of invasion to today in terms of Ukrainian security force and military confidence?
Oh, it's huge. I think they certainly, none of them would have predicted that Kharkiv would have held. Kharkiv is 15 miles from the Russian border, and immediately the Russians essentially surrounded most of the city, though there still is a supply line going in, and they're getting the new weapons from America. They're getting different things, food and so forth. But the fact that Kharkiv held, I just think nobody could predict that. Basically, it's strategic, from what I understand. I took classes for following weapons around, so I did take a Stinger class down in San Antonio, and I've taken some of the tank courses and things at the Pentagon would allow for analysts. I'm not a strategist, but my understanding is it's just confounding to observers why they're sending in tanks without infantry, and vice versa. Why they're doing, a lot of it, I think, is just the Soviet corruption. Who's chosen? It goes back to those same magic words, merit-based. In Russia, there is no such thing as merit-based promotion. No general got there based on merit. They got there based on who they knew and who owed them from the past. And it's why now 4 of 20 generals have died. There's 21 stars in the conflict zone, and 4 of them have been killed, Russian generals. And I think that the replacements are likely to be similarly incompetent, just because they just didn't have a structure to promote those who really wanted to make change and wanted to learn from conflict going on around them in the West.
So where is this headed? The Russian military is incompetent, corrupt, not moving at nearly the pace that the world expected them to, but they're merciless with bombing. Where do you see this going in 2, 3, 6 months?
Well, a lot of it's going to be the degree to which Putin's current negotiations are serious. The French foreign minister just said he thinks they're not. He made quite a public statement, which was kind of surprising, that they're a farce. But I think that the Ukrainians are hoping that they could negotiate, because in the end, it would be certainly a long period before Ukrainians could drive these Russian forces out of their territory, right? It's a different thing when you're taking the offense versus the defense, and the manpower problem shifts with Ukraine having very small relative to the Russian armed forces. But I think in the end, I think we've reached the point already where Russia will not gain any additional territory. They're going to be back and forth, I'm sure, at different points, but very small and relatively small shifts. So I think the negotiation and the degree that economic sanctions are impacting Russia will probably dictate how things go. I think right now the Ukrainians, they just had an offensive to clear the suburbs of particularly on the western side of Kiev, and I think a lot of that is let's move the artillery and move some of the ability for them to damage our city away. But I don't think they're necessarily ready to drive them, back to the border.
Let's talk about a sense of what's being lost here in a society. Tell us about what life is like or was like in Kiev. If you were a middle-class resident of Kiev, there's American middle class, and then there's middle class around the world. Paint us a picture of what a middle-class life was like in Kiev and what has happened to that and to the city itself.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think I can wrap my mind around a lot of the losses, especially Kharkiv, because they've really been taking a beating. Kiev is just getting maybe 10% of their building getting damaged, whereas in a place like Kharkiv, where a majority of buildings have already, one of the universities I was working with had its main building destroyed, and it's just confounding. Ukraine, they're obviously well known for agriculture. For a long time, it's a place with 2 meters of topsoil, which creates the mud issue, which we could get into, the fear of mud in Kiev because things sink. But agriculture is huge. They're going to take a big hit. We tend to forget how important agriculture is to economy. Even when Michigan had 2 of the 4 largest corporations in the world, both being auto at the time, agriculture was our largest export item, and it carries so many of the provides such a huge economic impact to a place. And in Ukraine, that's more so, but they do have a high tech element. The Ring company does all their R&D. I would say I prefer to Holiday Inn there, and they share this big high rise with the Ring Corporation. It hasn't been hit yet, but obviously they moved a lot of their personnel and stuff to Poland, and a lot of the high tech stuff I think maybe more flexible and may be able to come back fairly quickly. But the old industry there is going to, it's going to definitely take have a huge impact. The income levels there are a lot of it is under the table. It's not always that accurate, but Kiev is a bustling city. It's really an amazing city, and would surprise you at the amount of money that was there. And Lviv is equally really. I think the reporters there have been really struck with how much they like Lviv. They wouldn't have spent time there before. Now most of the press corps has spent time in Lviv or are currently working from Lviv. I think that looking towards the future, I really think that they can bounce back. It'll certainly help some of the new industry. And what's going to be hurt is these huge steel mills that have been, no one's going to build a new 1930s forge, and some of the things that are still kept alive and working there. I think some of that will have to, they'll have to transition away from. Many of them owned by large multinationals. And I think the war is going to have an impact there, in part because most of them are in the east, where Mariupol has one of the world's largest steel mills, and owned by the Indian company that owns a lot of Chicago now.
I'm surprised. I'm surprised by throughout our conversation today, Robert. You've been pretty positive, and compared to what we're all watching every day through the news sources and whatnot, the terror and the tragedy and the refugees and the loss. I'm hearing you talk about a future that could be good.
Well, I mean, again, within the context of a lot of bad, it's going to get worse before it's better when it comes to definitely, the lives of these people in terms of economics and other things. So when I'm saying, part of it is that I was so depressed the first week that in a lot of ways and I think you can see it with the Ukrainians as well. And the most popular politician in Ukraine, I would argue, is not Zelensky right now. It's the governor of Mykolaiv. He had a Korean father. Vadim Lee is his name. He was a sports figure, and now he gives a daily brief that's watched by 1 million people in Ukraine, and he's all about positive. And he says, you only win if you're positive, and maybe he's infecting me, but I think that the war right now has reached a point where I don't feel like this enormous tragedy. Anyone who's been around Ukraine, it's a country that was repressed, right? I mean, it's like Israel. It spent this huge amount of time not existing, and people finally had a state, and now that incredible fear. My wife told me, we once went to Chicago. We went to a Ukrainian festival in Chicago, and the woman who sat next to us, she was about in her 70s. She was from Paris, and she was a Ukrainian who fled the Soviet Union in the 20s, and she, as a kid, and she grew up in France, and she was saying, Ukraine was never part of my life, and had this kind of tremendous sadness about it. My wife was saying, I don't want to be her. And in the early days of this conflict. And I think that's kind of Ukrainians were like, how could it happen? Could we lose the whole country again? And I think for the last week and a half or 2 weeks, that's kind of fell from the shoulders a little bit. They're not confident that can't happen. And, I'm not saying it's not entirely impossible, but I really, right now, Russia's desperately pulling troops from places that he would never. He just pulled the troops out of the island they've been holding in Japan for like 60 years. He pulled the troops and the equipment out of there, and pulled troops out of occupied Georgia, South Ossetia, including South Ossetians, guardsmen, sending anything he can to Ukraine. But he simply doesn't have the amount of personnel considering their motivation. And each group comes, they're less motivated, less trained, less capable, and with less equipment that's breaking down very quickly. So, keep in mind that Germany did a test, and like only a third of its Leopard tanks worked during an audit one time, right? It's easy for any big bureaucracy to kind of just, we no longer really keep all these things running, check the box, collect your pension. They're pulling things out of closets now. So I am optimistic in that sense.
We've got a question in the chat, and I want to remind everybody we welcome your questions here. The questions about the resolve of the average Russian soldier, why are they there, and a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It's a huge part of this. Let's, in the end, we're watching these fights, but I mentioned the Battle of Voznesensk, right? It's this town that was on the way to my mother-in-law's home. And in Voznesensk, they were elite Russian paratroopers that flew in and took a hill above the town. And then this tank column came up with more than 50 tanks. And facing a 400 half volunteer, half military defense. But motivation is without a doubt the single biggest factor. They took out 3 tanks, and they said at least a dozen other tanks had their crews just flee. Right? They can claim, hey, we had no choice, we were fleeing, and others drove their tank away. But the number that flee is pretty huge, in part because they, the drones, they're paranoid. They feel like they're in a coffin, right? They're not motivated to begin with, and they're really not wanting to be the target in one of these vehicles. But as far as the motivation, a lot of it is, one, Putin didn't tell anybody. Perhaps his biggest Achilles heel in this entire effort is he didn't tell his very competent central banker that he was going to invade. And they left half their monies outside of Russia. These monies could have been it would have taken time. It's not easy moving these huge, it comes out to like nearly 300 billion in reserves. But they could have done a lot to get some of that liquid and back into their control. And he didn't. He was paranoid, right? So he didn't tell anyone. No one at lieutenant rank and below had any idea. They really thought they were just going to training exercises. And could you imagine, you're at a training exercise and suddenly, and when it comes to his, they have a lot of contract officers, but about 140,000. So less than the Ukrainian army and contract officers. So they still use the draft, and their draft is you do 1 year, and it's always the same. It always ends in April. So he also was taking these folks just before they were done, very, not motivated. Most of you can easily get around their draft if you're semi-competent. If you're no one in the middle class tends to go. If you either have some money or some connections. So it's kids from the villages, know nothing else. And so I think, one, you're not going to attack your neighbors. What would it take for us to go into Canada and start shooting people in Ottawa? What would it take to get Michigan National Guard soldiers to pull the trigger? It would take a lot of, constant brainwashing. And he really didn't do, yes, they've been doing that for about 6 or 7 years about the Nazis, right? But their whole idea was, well, there are brothers, but there's a few bad Nazis. Well, those aren't the people they're facing. It's pretty, so.
These are all great points. There's a couple other great questions coming in, and this the Russian resolve and the deterioration of the troops. Doug Luciani, one of Traverse City's great leaders, just chimed in. And so what happens when Russia becomes desperate? How serious do you believe, Dr. Peacock, the nuclear threat is?
I think the best answer to that is the meme that's been going around where you show Putin with that extremely long table. And, he would only meet the president of France side to side if he were to spend 8 hours beforehand with the doctor. He's paranoid about this virus like very few people on Earth are. He's not left his home in 2 years, and this is not a man who's trying to commit nuclear suicide. I mean, he's the exact opposite. He's a very fearful person, and I don't believe that someone who is that scared is serious about nuclear weapon. That said, the Soviet tactic from day one has always been take your shoe off and bang as loudly as you can. That is Soviet negotiations. You use the nuclear word as often as you can. It's the opposite of the United States. We're like, we got to be careful. Our diplomats we can't mention nuclear because, all of us want to de-escalate. We are de-escalating, right? Well, he believes in escalation strategy. You immediately escalate. That's when someone says, okay, I'll give you something. because thank God you're threatening me with worse. And frankly, Zelensky's kind of using a similar strategy when if you watch his speeches to the today to Germany, but to the Congress and so forth. He's not giving the speech I would recommend, but he's taken that we're going all in, close the sky. We want everything because, it works, I guess. It's a tactic. You demand what you're not going to get. And Putin, so it's difficult to read Putin. Obviously he's always been a closed person. He's this KGB, his only working career before politics was to try to get press German students to buy on their fellow students. We're not talking about a human being that is easy for a lot of us to really get in their mind and think about.
You don't sound overly alarmed about the nuclear threat.
Well, let's put it this way. I think I don't think it's the interest of the public. I mean, I don't think the public should be alarmed. There should be a lot of very smart people who are following it very carefully and should worry about it every day and any day. But I do not believe, Putin is not a madman in that sense. It is just, again, my personal opinion. And that's all we can talk about, because otherwise the Russian nuclear capabilities, nothing's changed, right? They slightly raised their readiness from things being unplugged to plugging them in. That's the first stage of readiness. But they're many, many, many stages away from, going DEFCON as we would. And so I just think it's, again, Putin, what I know for certain is Putin wants us thinking about it. Absolutely. He wants us thinking every minute that he's a nuclear power. And, there's a point, like Senator McCain said, do you let a broken down gas station get what they want just because they have nuclear weapons? Russia was once the economy the same size as Spain. It's losing that by the week, but it cannot maintain its current military capabilities. Yes, one worries about the Ottoman empires, if you will, right? The dying empires. But I really think, for one, Putin's soon going to have to turn inward. I personally think the main threats to him are internal. His population is declining in every year in terms of the number of ethnic Russians. He sits on the world's greatest colonial empire, right? Places like Dagestan and Chechnya, these places are itching to, get independence, and so I worry about that internal civil war that will happen at some point. But I just don't, yes, nuclear, let's psychoanalyze the North Korean president or Pakistan. Pakistan has a nuclear bomb. How much time do you think about Pakistan? Those who hid bin Laden, those who visited Putin on the day he invaded their president, they have nuclear weapons. So it's one of those things that it's like a tattoo. Nobody gets it unless you're thinking about it all the time. And it's just we gotta be careful of spending too much time considering an issue that, yes, it's threat, yes, it should be a priority, but I don't think it should affect our overall decision making.
Well, thanks for that. We've got just a few more minutes. I'd love to get to a couple of the other questions here. Tom Cook from the Cook Family Foundation and one of Michigan's great environmentalists is curious about the geography and what's changing now as a result of this. And he reminds us of Chernobyl. Maybe some of us have been looking at maps of Ukraine for the first time ever and just realizing that Chernobyl is north of the biggest city in Ukraine, and then there's all the water flows south toward Kiev. Tell us about some of the unique features and how they're being impacted.
Though on the day of the Chernobyl accident, all the wind was blowing north very irregularly, and that's why Belarus really suffered the worst of the effects in many ways. But it is very close. I think Russia taking Chernobyl, I mean, most military folks said there's no way. I mean, you would just avoid, the nuclear facility. But I think Putin in Russia has made a very clear decision that he sees this again as another way to scare us, right? Obviously, the actual containment vessel, is state of the art. I mean, I think the biggest concern, there may be more concern at the other nuclear, the largest in Europe nuclear facilities in Zaporizhia, which the Russians also control, right? That's also been a lot of press. That one's more worrisome because they have these external tanks which are used to temporarily store the radioactive materials coming out of there. They've not reached a long-term decision like a lot of places like the United States. It's still a political process where we're going to bury some of this stuff permanently. And I know that is because it's very open, because it was near where they were live firing at the time, that's a huge concern. Ukraine has done a lot of good things on the environment since the Soviet Union, but it's still, it's a constant concern there. Supposedly, I don't know how good the intelligence is, but there's some document that showed up and has been passed around the media in Ukraine about the military has been given the right to clear the trees in Ukraine as part of the part of this plan that Putin had once he took the entire country. And again, I don't know how true that is, but it's it's obviously in the middle of a war, all these environmental concerns get exacerbated in a huge way, and it's definitely a concern.
My colleague, Bridge Managing Editor Joel Kurth, just chimed in here. Any chance that we're discounting Putin and the Russian army too soon?
Sure. I think there is that chance, but and I think it has to do with the aircraft in particular. No one really understands they have 500. They supposedly have 500 aircraft that they're using either as bombers or fighters, and really they've been sending two or three. Why is this exactly? And I think it's a combination of they don't really have that many that are capable, but also they're really fearful at the tactical levels. They're really fearful of the anti-aircraft capabilities of Ukraine, both before and after the additions from the West. So I think that definitely if more competent generals took charge, definitely Russia could, first of all, they wouldn't be trying 6 different attack points. And I think they could accomplish some, go farther than I had suggested in my remarks if they had a more competent plan. But again, I just think it's less likely than the other reality.
Well, Robert, we'll take one more question. Sally Santaford is asking, the Cuban Missile Crisis still a source of fear and psychology. From your time in Ukraine and Russia, does that remain an issue and a motivator?
In terms of the Russians' motivation?
Yeah.
And the idea that, you can't put missiles or have bases near us, right?
Yeah.
I think the one problem with that as an analogy is that the Ukrainian example would be, what if Khrushchev said, no, Castro, we're not going to send missiles and we're not going to put a base, because that's what NATO was saying to Ukraine. So it's more a hypothetical, right? And even, the amazing thing, and this is, I wasn't that aware of the degree that we have no real capabilities in Poland, in Czech Republic, Slovakia. We're only now sending in a couple thousand troops, and there are no bases. So, NATO, our bases are near German ski resorts where the military prefers them. Some of the best places you can spend time are the extremely expensive facilities the U.S. military has, despite the fact Romania offering much more economical options. But we haven't moved up close to them. I think, there is an argument that the issue could have been handled differently. But I think we have to keep in mind that Putin, this has been an issue since 2007, and why Putin now, consider when Ukraine has gone now the farthest away from NATO membership prior to this invasion. They really, once Russia was fighting you, I mean, there's an active war since 2014. Nobody's, joining a defense coalition with you, because you're already in an active war. We got to keep in mind that 14,000 Ukrainians have died since 2014 before this current conflict. So it was, I just think I agree that it was definitely the same as the nuclear missiles going in Turkey, and we took them out back in the 1960s. So we each checked our box.
Well, I can't help but ask one more question from our great colleague, Mike Stabler, talking about the beauty of Ukraine, the architecture and the beauty of the country. If you can leave us one last thought, Dr. Peacock, what's being lost here, and can it be recovered?
Well, again, I'm going positive. It's an absolutely beautiful place. Like I said, especially, I have good friends that are Ukrainians, one from Michigan he's from Port Huron, and he runs a huge farm in Ukraine now. He's Ukrainian American, but he was born and raised in Port Huron, and he just says it's just amazing to plant in a place. I've heard that a third of the world's topsoil is located in Ukraine. And it really is amazing. You can dig and dig and dig. You never meet clay. Here I dig 2 inches in Florida, and you meet limestone. But it's a beautiful place, absolutely. And the architecture and they've rebuilt before. We got to remember that this is a place destroyed by World War II. A lot of the center of Kiev was destroyed. But all the other towns, Kharkiv was entirely destroyed. So they're going to rebuild again, and I'm optimistic. They're proud people. The Soviet Union wasn't a Soviet Union. It didn't have a real integrity until World War II. It made the country. People like Putin was part of the post-war generation, and in Ukraine, this will be remember the Alamos will be coming out of this event. So they will be rebuilding. These refugees, I mean, I've read press, and certainly they're getting more favorable treatment than some refugees in recent times. But let's keep in mind that most of them are temporary. They are coming back. They are wives and kids of people who are still in the country, and they will be coming back. I think very few will stay. Keep in mind that Ukraine also had an open visa to the EU. There was no visa required for Ukrainians, so they could have left to Europe anytime.
Well, you've offered such wonderful perspective today, and one of the great surprises is your positivity in the face of such darkness and tragedy in this moment. Dr. Robert Peacock, my childhood friend, it is a joy to have had you with us here today. You can see in the chat here how much people have enjoyed this. We will record this and present it to all Bridge readers probably later today. I can't thank you enough, my friend, and I think I can speak on behalf of all of us here that we wish nothing but the best for your mother-in-law and your family in Ukraine, and please send your wife our best wishes in this terrible time. And please look us up when you come home. It is so good to see you and to have you share your expertise. Michigan's own Robert Peacock, a veteran of Ukraine and its politics and policies. And it has been an honor to have you with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.